Welcome back. 20 years ago, a US-led coalition, including Britain, invaded Afghanistan with the aim of defeating the Taliban. 454 British troops died during the campaign, which began after the British government said the Taliban had allowed the country to become a safe haven for international terrorists. We're joined now by Ash Alexander Cooper, a former British Army colonel, formerly an advisor to the Afghan Ministry of Interior Affairs. Ash, great to have you on the programme this morning, but I wish under different circumstances. As someone who knows the country well, looking at the pictures that we've seen out of Kabul this morning, what are your thoughts?
It's just devastating to watch the scenes and to be constantly receiving texts and voicemails and taking calls from partners and friends and colleagues with whom we've worked for, in some cases 20 years, who are feeling very, very exposed, terrified, and just trying to think of how they can look to the future in a way that will protect their families from retribution. And obviously some of them are hoping to try and leave the country so that they can be safe in the knowledge that they won't be likely to be attacked or taken and disappeared by the Taliban once the West does leave fully.
Ash, what are your contacts saying about the security situation, particularly, of course, on the ground in Kabul? The Taliban were insisting that this was a peaceful takeover, others suggesting that perhaps there has been a degree of violence there overnight.
I mean, it's extremely volatile, as I'm sure you can see from the scenes that have been shared from, not least most recently from the airport and from the prison breaks that the Taliban have engineered, allowing thousands of prisoners, in some cases, Al-Qaeda, Daesh, ISIS, as well as their own Taliban prisoners leaving. My friends are telling me that, in Kabul, certainly the Taliban was in Kabul well before the propagandists in Doha had indicated that they would allow any Taliban fighters in. So I think we have to be extremely careful in listening to anything that comes out of the propaganda mouthpiece in Doha or elsewhere for the Taliban. They might speak good English, but actually the sentiments are not reflective on the ground of what the fighters are doing. Already we're hearing some pretty shocking tales of what is happening to women and girls, some being married off to Taliban fighters, many others being denied access to universities and schools and being told they can no longer work. And this has already happened, within 24 hours this has happened. So I think, sadly, we've seen this movie before that the Taliban produce. And if there are people who haven't seen this movie before, this is the trailer. It's not going to be something that I think is acceptable to most Afghans who've built up hopes and dreams over the last 20 years that their future could be different.
Of course, at times like this, there is an understandable desire to sit back, to ask whether indeed it has all been worth it. The Daily Mail this morning asking the very pertinent question, did our British servicemen and women lose their lives in vain? What is your perspective on that? Because as someone who's spent a degree of time in Afghanistan with British troops, with the FCO, clearly there were, on every 6-month tour, incremental gains. You mentioned women there, you mentioned the healthcare system. Looking back on it now, to see all of that work, well, much of that work overturned, must be a hugely bitter pill for you and your comrades to swallow.
I think there'll be plenty of time for us to pore over the detail and decide what or what wasn't worth anything. I think it depends on the perspective you have as to your view, whether it was worth it. I certainly am very proud of the things that my colleagues and I tried to do to support the Afghans. And I think that to say it's wasted is really doing a huge disservice to those who gave everything, particularly the Afghans, but also to those servicemen and women, non-governmental organisations, government officials. It's been a huge team of people who've, for the right reasons, gone back year after year to support this country and this community to give them a brighter future. Clearly, that looks extremely precarious as we speak, but the genie is out of the bottle. Women, girls, and young men and women have seen what is possible. The Taliban cannot put the cork back in that bottle. So it's very, very challenging right as we speak. The scenes, as I said, are extremely upsetting to watch. But I have to hope that there is a future for them that isn't as repressive as it was in the past. But the West and governments who can act must act now. The time for talking is over. We need to demonstrate with actions that we can support those most at risk, because there are many people on whom we have relied as the West, as the UK, who are now extremely vulnerable, and they are in hiding. My friends, some of whom have had to split up their families to ensure that if the Taliban comes knocking, that not every family member is in one house and therefore all at risk of being taken away. So, we need to move more quickly than perhaps some in leadership positions are thinking. The timeline is collapsing quickly.
And what then of the nature of the relationship between countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, and a government controlled by the Taliban? What should the nature of a relationship be? I'm
not a politician or an international diplomat, so I can't really comment on specifics other than to say we know that this is a fundamentalist terrorist organization, and the more we legitimize their brand of ideology, the more risk that poses to us. The likelihood, I hope it doesn't happen, but there is a huge, very big likelihood that that Afghanistan will once again become a haven for terrorism out of the sight of the West, who can do anything about it. And as I said, the prison break overnight that the Taliban organized and orchestrated in Parwan, where 5,000 to 7,000 Al-Qaeda and Daesh prisoners have been released. They will make deals with whoever it makes sense to make deals with at the time, and we will feel the repercussions of this for many years to come if we're not very, very careful.
Ash, briefly if you can, because we're just about to run out of time. Some have suggested that there was inevitability to that which we have seen in Afghanistan. Would you concur?
I think there was an inevitability. The speed at which the collapse has happened is not a surprise when you see how many senior figures in their government and in their leadership structure left and saved themselves. That meant that those at the lower levels and lower echelons had very little choice other than to give up. Otherwise, they would have been slaughtered, and many have been already.
Ash Alexander Cooper, really appreciate your time this morning. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.